Have you ever been overwhelmed by all the choices there are when it comes to pumps? Have you wondered how pump companies make the decision between how much suction strength to have or how much speed to have, and whether or not to have really high speed during the massage mode, or which range to give for speed or for suction strength during massage mode or expression mode, and really how to make that choice for what is the best pump for you or for your clients? Well, I have a guest on today who is not only a CLC and a pump user herself, but is an engineer. And when she was at the time in her life when she was using her pumps, it got her engineer brain thinking about these machines that we use to get milk out of our bodies. And she started digging into the research about how these machines are made and if there could be a better way. And so I'm so happy to bring to you Alex, who is here to talk to us about pump engineering and all the choices that pump manufacturers are making when they're trying to design pumps for consumers, so that you can be better informed and also so that you can feel good about the choices you make when you select your pump. So let's get into it. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. Having known only a handful of people who had ever done it and only seeing it up close a couple of times, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a childbirth educator, and an internationally board-certified lactation consultant, or an IBCLC. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore the systemic, medical, and cultural barriers that make feeding our babies so difficult, so that you know your baby feeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Hey, Alex, welcome back to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad to see you again.
Oh, you too. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'm having you back because you were on already to share your personal baby feeding story, and I'll have that linked in the show notes. But throughout that story, it shared how you came to do the work that you do now with pumps
Yeah.
and with your MilkDrop Cushion to make pumping more comfortable. And as we were talking, I thought, oh my gosh, I need to have you back on to talk to us about everything you've learned as an engineer about pumping technology.
Sure.
And yeah, so
Yeah,
that's what we're going to talk about today.
that's so cool. I think going through life as an engineer, you usually just assume that nobody wants to hear what you've learned because I don't know, for various reasons. So I'm always happy to chat about it and I'll try to keep it entertaining
I
as
think
well.
it will be. And I
Yeah.
think this is important. This is an important conversation for anyone who uses pumps and who's making a decision between pumps to understand, because everything that I've learned about pumps and about the 7 years that I've been doing this is essentially they're all about the same, right? It's
Yeah, I mean, there's certain what we would call variables and they have ranges. And so you're limited by a few things, and those variables might be cost, they might be materials, they might be suction level, but in the end, like, they all have to fit in these parameters. So yeah, they're similar. There's some differences, but yeah.
yeah, some differences. And within each of those variables, like some I get asked all the time, which is the very best pump? And I never can tell anybody a straightforward answer. I say, and then I start
Yeah.
talking about these different variables between the
Yeah.
different pumps. And that's because different people respond differently to the different variables of the different pumps. So it's really hard to know for each
Yeah,
person what is going to be best for them.
exactly. Spot on. That's the thing. I guess that is so interesting from an engineering perspective is that a pump is a machine, but you're using it with a human, and
Mhm.
humans are not machines. They don't behave how you expect. And especially in the realm of pumps, if you think about who is using them, when in their life they're using them, there is more than just the physical milk come out of breast, chest. It's so much more than that. There's hormones that are required for milk production and letdown. There is this connection with a baby. You may have all sorts of other pain and hormone and body changes going on at the same time. And it just creates this extremely, like, on one side, you've got this like really simple device that sucks. And on the other side, you've got this super complicated, messy situation going on. And you're trying to match the two. And I think that's why it's so hard to be able to honestly say this pump is going to be a game changer for every single person. And I think yeah, there's definitely a mismatch there. So it's not just you. I think we have exactly the same issue with MilkDrop, and I'm sure every single pump manufacturer has the same thing where they're trying to suit everybody, but they just aren't going to suit everyone. Which means
Exactly.
for
Yeah.
us as women and people who pump, we have to try lots of different things, which gets expensive and frustrating, and we probably assume that it's us. It's nothing to do with us. It's just
Right.
how it works. Yeah.
Right. Now I can say that X percentage of my clients have the most success with Y
Yes.
pump.
Yeah, it's a distribution. The majority of people will be fine with the majority of pumps, and then there will be people at the ends that need a slightly different fit or a slightly different rhythm or a slightly more or less suction. Yeah, even just the shape of the flange can change the experience. Yeah, I think everything it can be helpful to think about it as what we would call a distribution. Not everybody has the same experience, but a lot of people will. Yeah, or
Yeah,
can.
exactly. Okay, so you were an engineer before you were a parent,
Yes.
and did the engineering you did before you were a parent, did it have anything to do with pumping?
No, I was a civil engineer, which is I basically did engineering because my big brother did engineering, and I had no idea what it was about. And I got to the university on the first day, and there were like 6 different kinds of engineering to try. And I went through them and I was like, "I am not smart enough to do this." Like electrical, no idea. Can't even see it. No. Chemistry, chemical engineering, again, can't see it, don't understand it. Mechanical is like, "Oh, that's got stuff that moves. I think that's a bit too tricky." Environmental was interesting. And then I settled on civil, which is basically buildings, infrastructure, roads, rail, on the ground or above the ground, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I can get behind that. I can do Lego. It seems like it's got more maths than chemistry, so that's cool." So, yeah, that's how I ended up doing it, and I worked in structural engineering for a while, and then I lived in Canada and did avalanche engineering for a bit, which was super fun, and
Yeah.
then, yeah, came back and got welcomed into the real world, having kids and struggling with pumps. Yeah, I didn't come from a mechanical or a biomedical engineering background at all, but I think engineering, like any job or profession, it's just a method of solving problems, and every human is good at solving problems. They just solve it in their
Mhm.
own way, and engineering's just like one approach for doing that that seems to work fairly well.
Ah,
Yeah.
awesome. I love hearing that background. So
Yeah.
then you had this intense struggle with both breastfeeding your baby from the
Yeah.
body and with pumping.
Yeah.
And you started looking at this machine that was supposed to be taking milk out of your body,
Yeah.
and your engineer brain starts
Yeah,
move.
yeah, I mean, it was probably by about month 3 because I think I was just in survival mode, but after a while, I ended up having to pump quite a lot, and after a fair while, it was just blowing me away how I don't wanna be rude about it because it's a device that helps a lot of people, but I felt like it was quite rudimentary compared with the level of engineering and design that we see in other spheres. So to me, it was almost like a feminist thing. It's yet another area where there isn't research and there isn't that much funding put towards getting something that really works very well, and I think that's what started really eating away at me. Plus I was
I have a really busy week coming up, and I thought, what better way to reduce my stress than to go onto feastandfettle.com and order meals for that week so I can just take one thing off of my plate by putting delicious meals onto my plate. See what I did there? So I went on to their website. It's really easy to use. I looked at all of the menu options for the week, and some of the things I'm excited about are some grilled steak tips with a delicious Thai peanut sauce and some green beans with a soy sesame sauce that's on the side. But there's so many other things. And that is one of the ways that I am choosing to provide self care for myself so that I can reduce my stress load. If you would like to do the same and spend more time with your family and less time worrying about what's for dinner, go to feastandfettle.com to get home cooked meals delivered right to your front door. And you can get $30 off your first week's delivery by using my code MILK, MILK, and just let somebody else cook for you. You won't regret it.
Getting damage and pain myself. And so I was trying to figure out how to deal with that. And so, yeah, I started looking at the research, which is the first step I was like, surely there's some research on this that will give me some hints on what to try. And I found that there was like almost more research on how to get cows to milk effectively,
Mm-hmm.
because happy cow,
More
more milk,
money.
more money.
Mm-hmm.
But for us to milk effectively, I'm using air quotes there if you can't
Yes,
see.
I know. I was about to say Alex just used air quotes with to milk effectively.
More effectively. Yeah, there's just not as much, and it just seemed that got me interested. And then my husband's a GP. I think you call them family doctors in the
The US.
States, and
Yeah.
so he had the whole physiology of things, and we started looking at papers that were looking at how a baby sucks. And I was looking at that and I was like, whoa, that's totally different from what I thought was happening. And it's totally different from what my pump is doing. And that kind of, yeah, I guess that difference really got me thinking about why pumps don't do that too. And
Yeah. So what do pumps do?
yeah, so you having worked with pumps for so long, you could probably explain this better than me, but most pumps, they just apply suction. So they have a little you put your breast into them, and every single pump, whether it's manual, electric, traditional bottles or wearable potters, they all operate on the same principle, which is there's some sort of way to move a diaphragm, which is like a flexible membrane back and forth. And by moving that flexible membrane back and forth, you are you're creating suction in a sealed container. And because your breast is soft, you then pull the breast or the nipple tissue back and forth as well. And the only difference between a handheld pump, think like a pump on a water or something like that, is that instead of doing it by your hand, you're doing it with a motor. And the only difference between the traditional pumps and the wearable ones is the shape of where the milk is collected. There's nothing
Mm.
particularly fancy in all those different kinds of pumps.
Okay. And then in the wearable pumps, there's two separate motors,
Yeah, yes, correct. Yeah.
one in
And some
each.
of the more powerful traditional pumps actually have two separate motors as well. That's how they're able to get that extra suction. So
So like the
each,
quote unquote hospital grade pumps are
yeah,
double motors.
yeah, some of them are, some of them aren't. You can usually tell because you can have different controls
Mhm.
sometimes for each side. That's one way to tell. And yeah, you can get quite high suction from that because you've got double the motor.
Okay.
But yeah, that's pretty much it. And I guess, yeah, so it just has this suction. It's just like a vacuum cleaner.
But then when you open up a pump, what
Yeah.
does the motor look like
Yeah. So
inside of a
this
pump?
is where it's different. But basically, you just have like when you open up a pump, there'll be a bunch of wires. There'll be like a piece, they call it like a circuit board, which is just like a piece of, I don't know, plastic, and it'll have a whole lot of like silver bits soldered onto it. That's
Uh-huh.
basically there to, when you press a button, little signals travel through there and tell the pump to do stuff.
Yeah, we're
And then
all
you just have
familiar with circuit boards, I think, from
yeah,
computers and
yeah.
yeah.
And then there'll be cables connecting all of those up, and then there'll be a motor, which is basically like in it's probably different in every pump. Everybody will have a different way of doing it, but it could be like a metal cylinder, and the pump might turn something that pushes something inside that cylinder and creates a suction, which
Mhm.
then travels up the tubing and pulls that diaphragm back and forth. So there's like suction in
Okay.
that tubing as well. So yeah, there's like many ways to skin a cat. I don't know where that expression comes from, but do you have that?
Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
yes, uh-huh.
Many ways to skin a cat. So you can make that suction however you like. You could, I suppose, have a little arm that moves something, but basically all you're trying to do is pull air out of something, and then that that is creating the suction. And then
Right.
that travels all the way through the system to your breast, to your nipple. The
Okay.
unsuspecting victim
I
of the
know,
suction you
right?
just created. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
so usually it's a cylinder though. And
yeah,
many of us, I don't know, I've seen videos of cows being milked and
yeah.
I see like with those
Mhm.
machines and often you see a cylinder and I'm
Yeah,
using my hands now going
yeah,
up
yeah,
and down and that's
yeah,
creating some sort of vacuum pressure or
yeah.
some sort
Some
of
sort of suction, yeah. I guess, like, the I'm sure there's experts more expert than me on the difference between human and bovine anatomy. But I think that the cows actually have that lactiferous duct that you don't have in the human breast, I think. And so there is, like, when you milk a cow, there is an element of squeezing out milk, but for us, it's quite different from that. It's actually more and you will definitely be able to explain this better, but it's more like a when a baby is at the breast of a person, of a human, they are using compression, and it's more like a perfume dropper or a turkey baster or something. So you're squeezing a bulb, and then when you release the bulb, that's creating the suction. So there's still
uh,
suction, but it's not like massaging it out. It's actually creating suction and pulling that liquid up. If that I
okay.
don't know if that makes sense. Yeah.
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 Okay. And so then you mentioned earlier that when you started looking at research studies and you were seeing how babies suck,
Yeah.
it was so different than how pumps suck.
Yes.
Do you wanna talk about that a
Yeah,
little bit?
okay, I'll give that a go, and then you should definitely jump in here and
Yeah.
explain some things. So basically, a pump is it's a blunt instrument that we use to stretch the nipple back through suction, right? But when you look at what's happening in the mouth of a baby onto the breast, there are a few more things than that happening. So yes, the nipple is being extended quite a long way, so tick. But there's this element of compression that the baby is doing that I just described before. So they are compressing with their jaw, and you would feel this if you've ever fed a baby on the breast or chest. They are compressing, and then when they release, they're pulling, applying some suction that way as well. And then there's all sorts of other things happening, like they are fiddling with you with their hands, they're massaging the other breast, they're squeezing around, and also just by being your baby, they are triggering a whole lot of hormone releases to create and release milk. And so when you compare the two, you're like, how can a pump possibly do this to me? And it's not, they're not terrible. For a lot of people, they're really good, and they can be life-saving. They're great. But I just think that element of the compression and the kind of motion of a baby is not really there yet. We've just applied a vacuum cleaner at the nipple. A small, less
I know,
powerful.
but
Yeah.
with a baby, they do stretch the nipple, then they're actually
Yeah.
using their tongue to
Yeah.
compress the breast tissue
Yeah.
to get milk to come out. So
Exactly.
they're not nipple
Yeah,
feeding.
exactly,
So
and
they
the
stretch the
wave
nipple.
of that tongue,
Yeah.
it's not like it's not a wave, it is up and down, but yeah, there's a lot going on in that mouth that we haven't quite mimicked super well. Like, people are starting to, obviously, we're having a go, I'm sure lots of people are trying, The main issue is that it's expensive to do. So
Mm-hmm.
to be able to try to mimic what is happening in a baby's mouth, you need soft silicone, you need to try to, you're adding even more factors in there that now have to fit more people, but they're more complicated, so they're probably not going to fit everyone. The manufacture of these things are really hard, and then also there's all this R&D, so research and development. It might be like 4 or 5 years before you've been through all of the kind of tests you need to do to make sure it's going to work. And so
Right.
there is it's not that it's an impossible design task. It's a very tricky commercial task, I think. And which is, I think if you had a different industry, for example, if you could say, I think I can make a milking machine that gets more milk out of a cow, can you give me some cash to go and develop that, please? People would throw money at you. But if you say, I think I can find a way to make pumps more effective, is there really like a lot of cash for that? I think people would pay for a more comfortable pump. They would definitely pay for more, but you've got to get it to the point where there's a product to have for people to buy. And so that
Right.
early research and early development just isn't quite there yet. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I always struggle with we need pumps, and
Yeah.
we need people to have pumps to be able to work, or if they choose not to breastfeed.
Yeah.
But sometimes all this money, we
Yeah.
put so much emphasis on pumping
Hmm.
to the detriment on putting
Yeah.
it where it needs to be, like
Yeah.
giving women the right amount of time off
Oh yeah. How about that?
and giving them the right
Yeah.
support they need to be able to feed their
Yeah.
babies from their bodies.
Yeah.
Like, where should the money go?
Mm.
I struggle with that because, yes, I want people to be able to pump,
Yeah.
and sometimes people are doing that because
Yeah.
we don't have these other social supports in place.
Exactly. And I think that's exactly right. What have we got to support people going through this phase, right? This stage of their life, super important for them and their baby and everyone around them. And then also if they are going to use a pump, and some people want to, some people have to, if they are, then we shouldn't be in the situation where 15 to 18% of people have nipple injury, not just
Mhm.
discomfort, but injury. So they're injuring the part of their body that most needs care and is critical for feeding as well if they want to get back to feeding directly at the breast or chest. So the I think it's one of those things where we really want to support direct feeding, but if people are going to use them, we need to be able to help them use them, effectively and without having pain. And so I think there's room for both, and if I had my way, there'd just be a couple more zeros on the end of all the funding and we'd be able to solve all of them. A lot of them are like problems you can solve with money as well. It's not that complicated.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So where is all this 15 to 18% of nipple damage? Where is that coming from?
So there's a couple of two papers that have found that in the last 10 years. I can give you the links to those. And from the injury is from what I think the injury, my guess is that it is improving with changing flange sizes. So having sized pumps that suit the nipple size rather than one size. So in the last few years, there's been a real push to get people using what is the right size for their body. And I think that will make a big difference. And then I think also other softer materials and trying to change the way pumps are used. And then also a big part of it, I think, is education. One of the things that I did when I first got the pump, I was probably on the wrong size. And then I assumed that more suction is more milk. But actually more suction was
Right.
just more pain. And
I
I
talk about
pain,
this to
yeah,
people a lot. Yeah.
exactly. So I think there's a few things that that can improve that result. But yeah, that was from a couple of papers in the last few years. And hopefully we can improve that.
If you're listening to this podcast, then you are more than aware of all the barriers that can make feeding our babies so difficult. You are also more than aware that support can make all the difference. So, if you are struggling to feed your baby in the way that you had hoped, or if it is more stressful or anxiety inducing than you had anticipated, then what are you waiting for? I am here for you. Go to my website, www.quabbinbirthservices.com. I can't wait to connect with you. I can help you take the next right step in your baby feeding journey so that you feel less anxiety and get more joy out of those moments when you are feeding your baby. I can't wait to hear from you. Talk to you soon. Okay. Okay. Yeah. So, on this topic, then, we know that various pumps have different suction
Mhm.
strengths, different speed, range of speed. And
Yeah.
then it's really confusing because when you look at this, it'll be there's the stimulation phase,
Yep.
and then there's the milk collection phase,
Yep.
and the strength and the speed will be different in each of those phases.
Oh,
And so then when somebody looks at a comparison chart
yep.
for the various pumps that they are trying to decide between,
Yep.
it's hard to know. Do I choose based on the stimulation phase? Do I choose based
Yeah.
on the collection phase? What have you found in your research? Why do
Okay.
they change it so much between these different phases?
Look, honestly, it's not, from what I can gather, it's not like a particular reason. I think so maybe I'll just go back. Like there's some research on the pattern of sucking, right? Like how suction is if you think about it in like a wave. Do you remember in school when you did sine and cos? I don't know if anyone remembers those, but they're like this wave. And the how broad the wave is. So is it like a big ocean wave but really strong? Or is it like a little ripple from throwing a pebble in and you got so if you think about those waves, they're all different. And you can basically create any of them. If you're sitting down to design a pump tomorrow and I'd be like, what wave do you want to create? You'd be like, I'm not sure. Where's the data? Like, how do we know what works for women? And I would say, we don't have a lot of that. And you would say, okay, I guess let's just try this one and then we'll try that one and then we'll try and get some feedback from our customers and they can tell us what they like. And then we'll also put in a lot of variations. So we'll give them 10 steps to tell us how high they want the wave. And we'll give them two modes so they can decide for a little pebbly ripple or they can decide for a big ocean wave. And so you put that power into the customer's hand to decide what's best for her. But I guess the issue for that is it's really super confusing. And we're used to, when we buy things, setting them up and ranking them and saying, okay, if I'm going to spend $300 more on this pump, why? What's the big deal? Is it because it's better quality or is it just brand? Like, how do I know why this pump is better? So I would say, like most pumps, they have very similar lower and higher suction levels, and you can probably control them however works best for your body. There are some pumps that have higher suction that people who pump all the time, who double pump, who are basically exclusively pumping, they tend to like these higher suction pumps because they're able to get more out of them, right? Like they're more durable and it's like buying the professional version. So there are some pumps out there like that are pretty beefy. You can basically tell by the size of the unit, right? If it's a really big beefy one, it's probably got two motors in it, two suctions, super strong, will last forever. Probably not that portable, but at that point you don't really care about that. And then it goes all the way back to these kind of cute little portable ones that you can just pop in your pocket and walk around. And for most people, they're fine, but for some people, they don't have enough suction to get milk. And you really aren't going to know until you try it. So the best thing would be to find some good friends and ask them to clean it and sterilize it and try theirs or buy a new flange set. Or you can also rent pumps and you can try them that way. But yeah, most pumps have a stimulation phase, most pumps have expression or they call it something else as well. Stimulation or massage and then expression phase, and most pumps have a similar suction level. One thing to watch out for though, some of the cheaper pumps aren't regulated.
Mm.
So the ones that are more expensive that have a brand that you recognize or you can even look them up on the FDA, like it's all publicly listed. But in the States, a pump is what's considered to be a class 2A device, which means it's a medical device, which
Mhm.
means that when they manufacture it, they have to be manufactured in a facility that meets those standards, that has really good quality control, that, for example, when you press number 10 suction, it is actually going to be that level of suction, as opposed to something stronger that might hurt you, or something that might flick off and do something dangerous. So they have much better quality control. And then all the way through the production and shipping and distribution, all the way to you, it is controlled and monitored. And what that means is, if someone over in Idaho has a problem with a pump that she's been using and it's bad, that gets back to the manufacturer. They notify the FDA, and then they put a recall out on all of the pumps that are across the states for that device, because there's been some problem in manufacture. So that's like what regulation means. It's all these controls to make you safe. But there are a lot of pumps that don't do that, and they're really cheap, and you can get them on Amazon, and they look the same, and they don't have those controls. So it's up to the individual manufacturer or brand, and you've got to decide whether you're okay with that. So I would say that's the main difference in cost.
Okay, yeah. And here in the States, I can imagine that one of the ways you can know that is if you can get the pump through your insurance or not,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
FDA requires, or Obamacare requires that
Yeah.
pumps are covered by
Yeah.
insurance. And so
Yeah.
if it's listed by your insurance
Yeah,
company,
that would
then
be a very quick way
mm,
to figure that out. But I guess, like, I did spend a lot of time talking about that, but I do think it's really important, because it's all the systems that are there to protect you.
mm,
And I think they're there for a reason. That's why you feel comfortable going to those places and buying those products. And,
yeah.
this is going on your breast.
So
And
do you
the milk
aware?
that's in the container that is holding, that's going into your baby. So you want to make sure that container has been made in a good environment, and it's not got other materials in it, that it's tested, that all of that kind of stuff that
Mm,
you do for your baby, you should be doing for yourself too.
okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know. Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so if someone wants to know if their pump has been regulated or not, they can look it up on the FDA website.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
mean, they have like different, the FDA, the company that registers with the FDA might be called something slightly different to the brand name of the pump. The best way is just to ask the manufacturer, ask the brand. Just send them an email and say, "Hey, are you class 2A? Are you registered with the FDA with your pump?"
okay? That's
Yeah.
good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, now this is something that drives me crazy, so I'm gonna ask you to explain it.
Okay.
My understanding is that the word hospital grade is a
Ah,
misnomer, and
okay.
I always say multi-user pump. I don't
Yeah.
use the word hospital grade because what
Mhm.
it implies is that it is just a better pump.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true, and people will sometimes spend lots and lots of money to have
Yeah.
a quote hospital grade pump when really it's just a multi-user pump.
Yep.
So can you explain functionally from an engineer's perspective
Mhm.
why some pumps are called hospital grade pumps?
To be honest, I can't find a reason other than marketing or trying to communicate a feature of the pump. So there's two definitions that I've come across for hospital grade. One is exactly what you're talking about, so multi-user, meaning open, or you might have seen the words open or closed loop, which basically just means that it's okay to use between patients in a hospital, because milk isn't going back into the pump itself. So they can basically throw away, or you can take home the flange and the valve and all these parts that we know really well now, because we've just learnt that on this episode. So you take that home, and then they can take that pump to the next person who needs it. So it's multi user pumps. The second definition is a proxy for strength. Hospital grade kind of implies a higher strength or higher durability, or just like better quality in general. But I've never come across a standard or a regulation or a definition of what hospital grade means. People do report suction in millimeters of mercury, I think, MHG. So sometimes they equate that, but there's no, that I can find any engineering definition of what that is, what that number is. And the other thing to watch out for when people report MHG is that might be the suction at the motor, But once it travels through the system, past through the tubes, past the diaphragm, into your little contained area, you lose a little bit of suction all the way through. And so the MHG on one pump might be lower, but actually at the nipple is higher. And so
Mm.
you just that's not really making it simpler for everyone. But again, it's just one of these things where you got to try it and figure out if it works for you. And if you're finding that you need to be on the absolute max setting of your pump, you probably need to upgrade to something that is a bit stronger, because you'll wear that pump out a bit more.
That's good to know. Okay. So then the primary hospital
Yeah,
grade pump, I'm using
yeah,
air quotes again, that you see across the board in most
yeah,
hospitals here in the US is the Medela Symphony. That's
yeah,
$2,000 if you were to
yeah,
buy it.
yeah.
Why does it cost so much?
That one has some very durable equipment in it. So
Okay.
it's going to last for it's probably designed to last for, I don't know what their design life is. They'll probably do it in cycles, number of sucks, but that might last 5, 10 years. I don't know. You'd have to talk to a hospital, someone who orders the equipment. I might be wrong there. But it's designed to last longer and for more use and more people. And so any any product that you are increasing the design life, that's the term that we use in engineering. If you're increasing the design life for, you then have to pay more for better quality parts that are more durable, machined in a certain way that aren't going to just snap and break. So it's like higher standard engineering. Whether it's $2,000 worth or less is a different question. I don't know. I haven't seen what it costs to make those.
But
But
there's
yeah, they
nothing
yeah.
inherently better about that pump as a pump. It's just the higher quality.
High
It's not
yeah.
gonna fall apart. It's gonna last longer.
It's gonna last longer. It might be more it'll definitely be more quality control. There might be, like, I don't know if there's more settings. I don't think there are really. It maybe goes to a higher suction than some.
It might go to a little higher. People do report that they like it, they like it better than their at-home Medela, but if I were
Yeah.
to compare it to, like, the Spectra,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's much better than the Spectra.
Yeah, I did use the Symphony, and I had a Medela Personal, and there is a difference in suction between
Yes.
those, but there's
Right.
also it's tiny and yeah. But
Mhm.
yeah, I would say, having not worked there, and huge caveat on all of that, but just going back to principles of design, they are, if you want to increase the design life and the durability of anything, it costs more. So a big driver for a lot of pump manufacturers is cost. How do we get this thing to be affordable for people? And the way that you do that is by making things intentionally, like they'll last as long as you need it, but no longer. You know how when you buy
Mhm.
some products, I don't know if you've ever had a MacBook or whatever, those guys are the most amazing at that. I feel like you have your warranty for a year or something, and then, like, at
Right.
366 days, it breaks. So it's like that. Like, the engineering, I guess, like, the simplest way to explain it is you can make a bridge out of putting 2 bricks and a plank over it, but the
Uh-huh.
engineering part is, like, how thin can I make that plank? How small can I make the brick? Like, how can I design this so that it's the absolute minimum that it needs to be, but it's still safe and it still works and it still does all of these things, but it just doesn't cost the world to
Right.
do.
Right.
So that's what's happening here. Like, they are just, people are trying to create something that still costs you a couple of $100 rather than a couple of thousand, and they have to compromise somewhere.
Okay. Great. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for clearing that up because when
Yeah.
people say hospital grade, I don't correct them, but then I'll always say multi-user 'cause
Well, yeah, yeah,
I'm
you just
trying
say it back
I'm
and you hope that they yeah. Yeah, yeah, it's hard. I have noticed, like, from my side, it's like, how do I explain this feature with language that people already get? Because
mm,
you can't just introduce a new term. We don't have time, the attention span we have and the
I
willingness we
know.
have to, like, learn everything. We're just like, "Oh, just tell me what I need." So it can be hard to explain. So I can see how they came up with that, and it's pretty clever, but yeah, how
Plus
to be
it gets
explaining.
people to go out and spend $2,000 on a pump
Yeah,
that
no, that I
they
don't
think
think
they
that's
need at
okay.
home.
Yeah.
Yeah, or rent them for months on end.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Just
Okay, and go ahead.
interestingly, just one other little thing, like, I have this hypothesis that one of the reasons why flange sizes are or used to be, like, pretty much the same size for everyone is again a cost and trying to meet all needs. So if you think about it, like you're sitting there in the design studio and you're like, hey, how wide do we make this flange? And someone's, I don't know, how wide are people's nipples? And you're like, oh, we don't actually have a lot of research on that. Let's go and measure some, and then we'll just choose the biggest one because that will fit everyone. Can you see how that would have happened? So you're like, okay, we'll just
Right.
use 24. That'll fit everyone. If someone's smaller, it'll still fit, and not very many people will need much bigger than that, so they won't be damaged by using something.
Except
Um,
they are.
yeah, exactly. So this is where the assumption that smaller can just fit in the bigger one goes wrong, right? That's like this big flaw in the whole idea. And the other thing is that when you just manufacture in one size, it's a lot cheaper because you're not changing your production run. So you can bring the cost down a lot. And so you can see how that happened. But then there's this gap where they haven't gone back and found out how that worked and did anyone get damaged and what should we do? And that's when people are like, oh, actually, maybe we need smaller sizes. And often that comes from the women using it themselves. Like I remember reading about is it Pumping Pals or something? It was a guy who saw his
Mhm.
partner pump and he was like, this isn't working. I'll make something. So it
Right.
often comes from the people using them. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was the final thing I was gonna ask you about is phalanges because
Yeah.
I have a private practice, that's my primary focus, but I do work in a hospital just 2 days a month on
Yeah.
the postpartum floor. And I do this because I think it's important to have a wide range of experience as an IBCLC,
Yeah.
and because it is really fun to get in there with those brand new moms and brand new
Yeah.
babies and just get to see what's happening and what they're experiencing. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I try to do with every single person who's open is say, "Hey, would you like me to measure you so that you know around about what size your phalanges are?" And I always explain, listen, this isn't an exact science. So I'm
Yep.
going to give you a number, I'll write it down for you. But really, the best thing to do is try out a couple of sizes that are around this size and see what feels the most comfortable, what produces the most amount of milk, because it's part science and part art. It's
Yep.
not exact.
Yep.
So I always explain that to people. But in the hospital, we give them a kit to use with their hospital grade pump
I
if they're
think I
going to
know
be
where this is
pumping while
going.
they're there, and it comes with the 24s and the 27s, so they already have those, and then we have 21s, which we often run out of because it's the
Yep.
smallest size we have, and then we also have tons and tons of 30s and 36s. I have never once in my life measured somebody at a 30, much less a 36. Why do they even
I don't
manufacture?
know. I don't know. I think didn't they used to think that you needed the areola to be pulled in as well to stimulate more? I
Maybe,
think
I don't know.
yeah, I'm not sure. I One thing I often see, because we get people coming to us after they've tried everything, right? Like they're not in a good place. They've tried pretty much every product out there. They've tried all the flanges, and often they they have pain, and then the natural assumption is like, oh, this is too small for me. If you try on some pants that are too small, it fits tight, and you're like, ugh, I'll get the size up. So I think that's what's happening. And so people end up with these bigger and bigger sizes because they're like, oh, I tried the 24, it was uncomfortable. So I tried the 26, it was still uncomfortable. Tried the 28, tried the 30, and they just keep getting upsized. And
Well, also the thing that happens is they hear that there's supposed to be no rubbing, and what they're seeing when they look at
yeah,
themselves is that the areola is rubbing, and
yeah,
they think it's their nipple
yeah,
because the areola looks like the nipple, and so then
yeah,
they keep going bigger and bigger. But
exactly.
actually, the way to
Yeah,
keep the areola from rubbing is to
yeah,
allow a little tiny bit of the nipple to rub with
yeah,
some
yeah.
lubricant, and that
Yes.
allows
Yeah.
no areola to come in. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I think the other thing is when you take your nipple out of a pump and just freshly pumped, the shape of your nipple is quite bloated.
Right.
And so some people measure from that as well. But
Right.
actually
Yeah.
that's because we've just applied the end of the vacuum cleaner to your nipple, we've pulled
Right.
everything evenly back. And
Right.
so we've pulled out the areola and the nipple. And so it's this like square or very plump, swollen nipple shape.
Right.
And I think, yeah, that there's problems with that as well. People are smart and they've figured that out. They're starting to figure it out. I've noticed even in the last few months or so that the quality of people's knowledge about their own nipple shape and size and what they need and what they don't is pretty high. So I think
Yeah.
that education's coming through. We have a little blog post on my site which I put up about a year ago, and since then we've had 30,000 people visit that and spend 7 minutes
Wow.
on it. Going through it's so detailed, and when I wrote it, I was talking with a marketing person, she was like, "This is so nerdy and so detailed, you need to cut it out," and I was like, "Oh, but I feel like I wanna know these details," and so I think it has helped a lot of people, so I can share that if that's appropriate,
Yes.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it just really goes through blow by blow, like what it should look like, what it shouldn't, how it should feel, and you might have some comments on if you think we could improve that as well, but yeah, I've found that people really do know what they're doing a bit more now.
Yeah. Yeah. I find it to be true as well. Although when I measure people in the hospital, they're very surprised.
Mm.
Sometimes they're having even a second and a third child, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, this feels so much better. Why are
Oh,
you the first person telling me this?"
and they get more milk
Yeah.
often too,
Yeah,
right?
they get more milk. They get more
Yep,
milk. Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, but the one thing that I have learned recently that I did not know until maybe the last couple of months is that you measure the tip of the nipple, not the base. So not
Oh, really?
where the nipple meets the areola, but just the very tip of the nipple. Yep.
Huh, I've
Yeah,
always told people the base. Maybe I need to go
me
look at that.
too. Until very recently, and a colleague of mine who is like absolute expert at this. She's done
Yeah,
thousands and thousands of flange measuring. She owns every
yep,
pump there is. She's gone to all the pump manufacturers. She's trying to convince them to change the sizing, the standard sizing that they send out there.
yep. Oh, good for her.
I trust her, and this
Yep,
is what she
cool.
teaches in her.
Yeah, we so for our cushions, we measure from the base, but that
Mhm.
we don't add any millimeters on or anything like that, and that's because the cushion moves with the nipple, so it's a little different, but
Yeah.
I can see what you mean. I'll have to anyway, good to know.
Yeah, it's something to
Have
try
to look
out
that
with
up.
people.
Yep,
Yeah, so then tell me, so you have the MilkDrop Cushion.
yep,
And, essentially, it goes on the end of any phalange. It could
yeah.
go on the end of a wearable pump or a hard flange.
Yep, so we're just about to release a wearable pump version,
Okay,
but right now they're just available for the
for the
traditional
tabletop.
flange, yeah. They
Okay,
just
yeah.
fit on the outside, and what we're trying to do with those is they on the underside, we have a series of ridges which mimic the location of that hard, soft palate juncture and also the
Oh,
mouth and the tongue, and so when the pump sucks, it also pulls that uber soft silicone in and out. And we're trying so that it slightly compresses your nipple, but also moves with your nipple. Instead of your nipple smushing up against a hard piece of plastic, it's now moving dynamically in the pump. So we're not totally all the way there, but we're definitely a step closer to how your nipple naturally moves when your baby is on it. So that's what the cushion does, which can work well
mhm.
for some people and doesn't work for everyone. And so we have these like a month of trial so you can try it and then return it if it doesn't work for you.
Oh, that's great.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Awesome.
yeah.
Cool. Okay, what are the size ranges that you have drop
Yeah, so
pump?
we have up to we have extra small is 15
Uh-huh.
millimeters, and then we have a 20 and a 25. But you
Okay.
can use it on any pump flange size.
So
So
even if you
you
had a 13,
yeah, yeah,
a size
it'll
13?
still be fine. Like your nipple will pass through the 15, still go into your 13 flange, so you'll still be in the right size, but it just allows for a bit more movement as you do that.
Okay. Awesome. So people can try it for a month and then send it back if
Yeah,
they don't like it.
yeah,
That's amazing. And then what do you do with the ones that people send back?
we will either sterilize them and donate them, or we can recycle them as well, but we have to build up enough bulk to do that to make it
Okay.
worthwhile. So we just store
Okay.
them at the moment.
Okay.
But, yeah, I think for us, it's pretty hard to say to people, "You've just gotta try it," and then it's not all this stuff adds up in the end, it
Right.
costs. So that way we allow you to try it, and also there's so much trial and error, like the cushion with an insert, the cushion with a different flange, the cushion on a
Right.
different pump, no cushion, like, it's just a tool to
Right.
use, and yeah, that's pretty important to us that you can do that. Yeah, good.
Yeah, and I love your attitude about it that you're right, that not everything is going to work for every person and try it. If it
Yeah,
works, great. And if
yeah.
it doesn't, that's fine too. Yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think I do ask questions, like, I wanna know what didn't work so that we can then design something that does, but I it in terms of it if it isn't, then, yeah, I just don't think it's fair to make people take products that don't work for them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much. I told you, "Hey, we're gonna talk for 30
I
minutes," but you
know.
have so much
Oh,
information to
I'm
share.
sorry.
No, this I could have stopped it at any time, but I was enjoying the conversation, so this was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. I know that all the time and energy that you have put into understanding pumps is valuable, and I appreciate you spending this time with me so that I could share it with our listeners so that they can have an understanding as consumers and as people who use pumps going into it. It's so important knowing that pumps really haven't changed in like 100 years, really. Like the
Yeah,
basic mechanism is the same. And so it helps everybody to be able to go in with a clear mind, knowing you can feel confident that you can make choices about your pumps
yeah.
based on the variables that feel right for you because you're
Yes.
not going to make a wrong choice.
No. And if it's not working for you, you'll know. You can change that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember when I first started trying to breastfeed, and there was this, like, l couch kind of chair in the hospital that had, like, exactly the right height of arm that I could put my baby on, and it, like, reclined exactly the right amount of distance back, and I remember having this thought, this is on, like, day 3 or something. I was like, "I have to find this chair. This is the only chair that will help me breastfeed, like, it has to be this one," and I made my husband research, and he's like, "Alex, they're $2,500." And I was like, "I don't care, get the chair." And he was like, "No, we'll just go home and see how it goes." But I just remember that in that moment, you're just, like, clinging on to
Right.
this, I don't know, and so the decisions that you make in that moment are
Right.
probably not the best,
Right.
and so I just think pumps are quite similar, and you will find something that works for you, but if you can, try and rent a few and fiddle around
Right.
and get an appointment with your IBCLC and
Yes.
let them help you get set up. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah, I love that story. It must be this $2,500 chair. It's the only way I can
it
feed my
was so
baby.
ugly. Oh my god. It was so ugly. I
Yeah, a
just
hospital
I'm so
chair.
glad I'm so glad we didn't buy it. We couldn't have, but terrible. Anyway,
I
some life
love that.
decisions are good that they passed you by.
Right.
Thank you so much for having me, and, yeah, I really appreciate your curiosity, and hopefully I haven't said anything incorrect or offended anybody who makes pumps, so much respect to all of you, and I hope, yeah,
Yeah, no, this
if I've
was
said anything wrong or if someone picks something up, please let me know and we can adjust it.
yeah, absolutely, and you know what? I've been corrected on this podcast before, and
Yeah,
then I went in and I said in the audio, "Guess what? A listener reached out and they told me such and such was wrong, and I
yeah,
looked it up and it was wrong, so here's the corrected audio." And
yeah,
then I corrected it.
that's just the world working as it should, so, yeah,
Yeah,
if anyone disagrees, that's cool, that's
yeah,
science. Yep,
exactly. Yep,
cool.
yep, so we know
Alright.
that this is the opinion of Alex and Lo and of nobody else.
Cool, alright, thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So, in a nutshell, our bodies are these incredibly complex organisms that are able to create milk. And then the interaction between a baby and a mammary gland is way more complex than a vacuum system sucking the milk out. And there are only so many variables that a pump manufacturer can think about to suck that milk out. And so you can rest assured that really the hardest part about choosing a pump is that it gets expensive. trying to choose the right pump for you, because really you just have to try a bunch. And so if you're able to borrow a few from friends, or even better, go to an IBCLC who has a bunch and specializes in helping you select the right pump for you, then you can order your insurance covered pump after you have both selected your pump and discovered the right flange fit for you. With that being said, I was so delighted to have this conversation with Alex. And if you want to talk more about how pumps worked for you, what your process was in selecting the right breast pump, join my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. And if you would like to have more time to feed your baby, whether that's from your body or whether your kids are already grown and you're not feeding them from your body, and you live in Massachusetts or Connecticut or Rhode Island or New Hampshire, go to feastandfettle.com and get your first week's delivery of home-cooked meals, $30 off with my code MILK, MILK. I got another delivery last night, and we had these delicious, kind of spicy green beans and steak tips with a delicious peanut sauce. They were so good. So check it out if you want to get some extra time back. With that, I'll see you on Monday. Bye.